Hello everyone, it's time to do another deck profile, this time on the Nirvana Jheva or crossover dress dead Chad in prayer version, aka using both regular overdress and crossover dress in the same deck. And I have to admit, this deck is really weird because spacing reasons is actually the main thing. Crossover dress is an interesting concept but wasn't exactly fun to play. That's why I originally did not really build it, but a friend gave me the deck, so I might just play the deck now. But the regular overdress felt more fun and more interesting than crossover dress, and now incorporating both versions into one deck, the deck, it feels really weird, but a little more fun at the same time. Because I find regular overdress a little more fun than crossover dress in a way. Because crossover dress requires 2 cards to make 1 unit. And that's basically base Verena combined with armor. Now, the regular overdress, it's basically Verena with evolutions. And that's probably why I like the regular overdress more, because you can overdress and then on top of that overdress even further. And that's probably why I like the regular overdress more. And now with the combination of both overdress and cross overdress, the deck might become a little more interesting, like there's a build up to something. Because set 10, in a way, not really support both concepts in one deck, but you can definitely play both regular overdress and cross overdress in one deck now. But you can definitely play both regular overdress and cross overdress a little more consistently, especially with set 10, although this is set 9 right now. And like I said, this is the Chat and Prayer version, so obviously I'm going to be running the order card, which is of course this playmat artwork for the card. But other than that, I do really hope this does build up into something, because this is a Protagonist deck. He's using regular overdress and cross overdress. Overdress represents the past, the cross overdress means he's moving on to the present. What will become the future is what's the question. Will it be a new form of Nirvana is my theory here, because it feels like they're trying to build up to something with overdress and cross overdress. Because out of nowhere, they decided to make both concepts into one deck, which really felt weird. They could have just continued the cross overdress concept, but they kind of didn't, and I do feel like cross overdress is a bit lackluster and not as fun as regular overdress, but it is still new, so who knows. But anyway, now that I just told you my thoughts on the deck, I do still like the design and the concept of it. Hopefully that they will do something big once when the final set of maybe Yu's story or this arc comes in. But anyway, to the deck itself. We start off with the Ride deck. Obviously your starter, I'm going Sunrise Egg, which goes to the new version of the Grade 1, Heart Pounding Blaze Maiden Reno, because unlike the original version, because unlike most other ride lines, this one actually has a changed new form ride line. So this new version of Reno, when you ride the new Ryu on top of it, you call Trickstar from your deck. It does exactly the same thing as the original Reno, but there will be a few differences here. Now the second skill, you're just never going to play it, because it's just during your turn you get Prayer Dragon plus 5k, but you're not going to ever have this on rearguard. I'm going to be very realistic. And the Prayer Dragon is basically what combines with Trickstar for the crossover dress, in which we go to Snuggling Blaze Maiden Ryu, has the same second skill during your turn. You have Prayer Dragon plus 5k, but that's not going to matter. It's the first skill that matters, where when you ride the new version of Nirvana, aka Nirvana Jheva, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 Prayer Dragon from among them, reveal it, and put it in your hand. So basically the ride line searches up your pieces that is not the Verena, which is kind of unfortunate compared to the original, because the original at least searches up one of your overdress pieces so you could do your play, but this one kind of requires you to have a third piece already drawn. But anyway, now to the Grade 3 itself. Chakrabarti Phoenix Dragon Nirvana Jheva, the Nirvana Reborn. And hopefully it's the new Messiah of Cray, so we could get something awesome. But anyway, it has 2 skills, the first one being an act. Once per turn, you can discard a card from your hand, choose 1 Trickstar and a Prayer Dragon from your drop zone and call it to rearguard. Basically, kind of better than the original Nirvana, where it only calls the Trickstar, but this is basically just for a setup, because so it just kind of makes sense. So in a way, it's not really doing much difference. Now, calling 2 units can be more effective, of course, it's just a little better, but this is basically just calling your pieces for your setup plays, just like the original, except the original just does regular overdress. And you're also locked into a Trickstar, just remember that. But the second skill is auto. When this card attacks, cost count +1. Choose one of your rear guards that is in cross overdress and stand it. So basically multi-attack, which I could already immediately have one problem with this deck is that the Vanguard attack is usually really weak. There's also the lack of booster problem as well, unless if you decide to continuously use Jheva's skill without using cross overdress or overdress in this case now. Because yeah, this deck will lack back row. Because you're going to do a lot of cross overdress and it's piece reliant just to make one play. But overall, the multi-attack isn't bad. And of course, this is just your main grade 3 for the cross overdress deck, so you just have to play it. You can go for regular Nirvana, but regular Nirvana is obviously not as good for this deck. In which we go to the main deck itself. Persona Ride, you have to run the other 3 copies. And then to the remaining grade 3 units, let's start off with cross overdress units. We start off with Vanguard. So cross overdress, how it works is that you use a trick star along with a prayer dragon to make one unit. So in this case, you're going to be using a total of 3 cards just to make one compared to regular overdress where it's 2 cards. And that's basically all cross overdress does, is basically just uses 2 cards to make one, which can be a big minus in many cases, but to make one play, it's okay. You're not doing anything too interesting other than doing this most of the time. But anyway, to Vanguard's skill, in cross overdress state plus 10k, and if your opponent's Vanguard is greater or greater, plus another 10k, and it's during your turn, so 33k beater on its own. That isn't too bad, especially combined with the second skill where when an attack hits in cross overdress state, you can Soul Blast 1 to choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire all your opponent's rear guards in the same column. So basically big beater that gives out pressure. That's not too bad. This is going to be one of your main restand targets for Nirvana Jheva, obviously because big beater plus attack pressure, hence why you kind of just run this. Now you could run more copies, but I decided to do a little bit of split because of the next card. That being Flare Cannon Equip Vanguard. So this one is a little interesting and you could technically play this at 1. This is a more situational card. Cross overdress, same condition, like all of them. If this card is in cross overdress state, you can Soul Blast 2, choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. This is not once per turn, keep that in mind. And the deck doesn't really use too much soul other than really with this card. So go ahead and keep abusing your soul to kill your opponent's field. Because this builds up to the second skill where when this card attacks in cross overdress state, this card gets plus 2k power for every open rear guard your opponent has. And then if they have 1 or less, you can counter blast 1. This card gets a drive check, but drive -1 into the end of that battle. So basically, if you nuke your opponent's field enough to the point where it has 1 rear guard, this basically can get the drive check ability. And that is pretty nice. It's basically a rear guard that can attack like it's a Vanguard. That's pretty good pressure right there. The only thing is, it's a little bit of a situational card because it does rely on your opponent's field and relies on how much soul you have. Like I said, this deck doesn't use its soul, but you don't really gain soul either. So that is a thing. But one nice thing about this card is that it's not locked to your opponent being grade 3. So if you get this off early game, your opponent usually doesn't really have much of a board, meaning that you can use this drive check skill to just even pressure your opponent even further. So that's why I just kind of like this card and why I decided to do a 2-2 split. And depending on situation, this card can actually be pretty good late game as well. It's also kind of a decent restand target if you can pull off the drive check again. So there's also that as well. Overall, I kind of like the 2-2 split. It's been working out pretty well. And now to a regular overdressed unit. I play Verena Valiente. So overdress is on top of Trickstar or a unit in overdress state, which you're very likely just going to do it over Trickstar. I'm going to be very realistic. But anyway, it gets plus 5k power for every original dress. So the overdress on top of overdress, more you do that, the more power it gets. Sure, because it kind of builds up to the second skill where auto, once per turn when this card attack hits while in overdress state, you can counter blast 1, discard a card from your hand, and stand this unit. So it's another attack hit pressure card that you can use. Combined with Vanguard, that could actually be a little bit nasty. Overall, this is now searchable through this deck thanks to one of the new support cards. So that's why I decided to run this, and the attack hit pressure for early game isn't too bad. Sure, you could run Expecta instead, but at the moment, this is probably the better card just for more consistency right now. So that's it for the grade 3 lineup. To the grade 2 lineup. First off, Vanguard. So crossover dress, main skill, count, rear guard. In crossover dress state, it gets plus 10k power. And then during the battle of this card attack, your opponent must use 2 cards to guard this attack. And yes, the power stays at your opponent's turn too, which is also very nice. So it stays 20k in crossover dress state. And it has a nasty guard restriction that could finish off your opponent. Hence why I decided to run this. Not really too necessary to see early game, but late game, this is just really good. So yeah, of course you're going to play this. Now, to a regular overdress unit, but because I don't have Verena arcs, I'm deciding to play Verena Urger. You're not going to use this for the first skill because it has to be from hand and it requires you to have the original Nirvana. So we're just going to skip that and go to the second skill. Like usual, it overdresses on top of Trickstar, and while in overdress state, this is going to be active on your opponent's turn as well. This card gets plus 10k power and 10k shield. So it's a 15k interceptor that is also a 20k beater. Right now, this is just my best option I have so far because I don't have extra copies of Arcs right now. I'm just waiting for a reprint because Arcs is definitely better just for draw power. But at the same time, Counterblast is heavy for this deck, so sometimes this card is better. And the defensive value is pretty nice as well, as long as this card doesn't get killed. And for early game aggression, since you're going to be able to call the Trickstar out of your grade 1 from the Ride deck, you could just easily just make an overdress play right here and just have a 20k beater that's also a 15k interceptor. So it isn't entirely too bad as an alternative right now, along with one of my next cards, that being Golden Knight, because I wanted to play 4 Arcs with 2 Valiente or maybe 1 Valiente with 1 Gallo Knight, but currently I don't have that, so it's going to be 2 Golden Knights. So Golden Knight, this is a prayer dragon, so when this card is used for original dress, choose the outer dress unit, it gets plus 5k power. And then if that card happens to be Garu Verena, it gets plus another 5k. Why I play this? Not only that this is a grade 2 that you could just call back with Nirvana Jheva, this is also for just in case purposes as well. This can be used as another attacker if you cannot perform crossover dress or you just need another attacker overall. And another thing, it doesn't cost any Counterblast or Soul Blast, which is a really big thing because Counterblast is really heavy in this deck right now and there's no way to countercharge until set 10 with Mirror Verena. So this card is just pretty decent right now since this one has just no cost, so you at least get something. Now if I have my 4 copies of Verena Arcs, I might be taking this out, or just 1 copy of this with 1 Valiente with my 2 Urgers to make my 4 Arcs, or maybe I'll just run 3 Arcs, who knows. But yeah, this card, it just kind of helps. So that's it for the grade 2 lineup. To the grade 1 lineup. To strike, equip Dragon Stragaglio. This is going to be your main new card for the deck, especially because this one interacts with both Overdress and Cross Overdress. So the first skill is that when placed from hand and your Vanguard is Nirvana, keep in mind, Nirvana, it doesn't have to be the new one. You can discard a card from your hand, search your deck for 1 Overdress unit or 1 Trickstar and put it to your hand and of course shuffle your deck. Very important because this just searches up your piece. The discard doesn't really matter sometimes because you're just going to bring it back. And this is basically just your consistency searcher for your overdressed unit. Especially combined with the second skill, because this is still a prayer dragon. When this card becomes original dress, you can counterblast 1. You can call a Trickstar from your drop zone to rearguard, which will of course be the overdress plus cross overdress play that you're trying to do. So yeah, you just have to run 4 copies of this card because this is your main consistency card. And this is the main prayer dragon that you really want to see as soon as you can. And then finally, 1 Bramda, because when this card becomes original dress, you can counterblast 1 to draw 2 cards and then discard a card from your hand. This is just another alternative way to do stuff. Not too ideal, I would have to say. In fact, if I have Arcs, I might even just choose to not run this and just stick with Gallo Knight, just because Gallo Knight doesn't cost counterblast. This one still costs counterblast, and counterblast is still very heavy until we get Mirror's Verena. And finally, to the last of the grade 1s, we get the 4 PGs, one of them being the Blitz Sentinel. And then, because this is the most important card of the deck, the Trickstar. You have to run 4 copies. It's basically vanilla, but it just cannot be chosen by your opponent's card ability. It's your main card of the deck, you just have to run 4. Now, speaking of Chat and Prayer version, I do run the Chat and Prayer. Or Clad in Prayer. So you play it if your Vanguard is Nirvana. And then you choose up to 1 overdress unit and or 1 cross overdress unit, and they get these abilities. The overdress unit gets this ability where auto, once per turn, when your Vanguard attacks, you can stand the unit. The cross overdress unit gets plus 10k. This is pretty good value, you could say. Good number of attack pressure here, especially for the cross overdress unit to get a lot of power, and then the regular overdress unit to get a restand. That's why Urger isn't entirely too bad as a 20k beater that can stand twice, or even Valiente for a double pressure attack. Or if you have Expecta, you can go to big attacks if you want. But yeah, you don't really play too many copies of this. Not only that you lack space, you also need to dedicate a lot of resources to pull it off. It is fun to pull off, I will have to admit that, but probably not the most ideal play to make even for this deck. In fact, who knows, the next set I might even choose to take this out, but I don't know what they're trying to do right now because it seems everything is dedicated to make Overdress and Cross Overdress a thing, and pulling this off is fun. That's why I just decided to run it in. It is a pretty good card, just dedicate a lot of resources to it, which is why I play 2. I have managed to draw this at least once per game, and in the right timing a lot. Kind of strange right there, unless my luck is just that good. And now to the triggers. Over triggers, no questions to ask. You got to run your crits. You could even choose to run 7 crits and go 4 draws instead. Up to you, because it is piece reliant, so maybe you might want to do that. And finally, 4 heals, because heals. So that's it for this deck profile of my Nirvana Jheva deck, or my crossover dress deck, Clad and Prayer version. What other changes would you make, and what other cards would you recommend? Like I said, I don't have arcs right now, or extra copies of arcs, because I have them all in my regular overdress deck. So right now I'm playing Urger as an alternative right now, so just letting you know about that one. I would definitely prefer to play arcs because of draw power. But overall, I kind of have fun with this deck. As a regular crossover dress deck, it just felt a little boring and lackluster. I do like the concept of it, but it just felt boring. Regular overdress felt more fun because you're doing overdress on top of overdress, which is why I kind of like that deck better. This one just kind of doesn't do any changes. You just do your cross overdress plays with the Trickstar with the Prayer Dragon. So not much really changes, other than whatever Prayer Dragon you use will determine what additional skill you get. But at the same time, I will have to say it is a little weird that they're putting in regular overdress with cross overdress when they're kind of 2 separate decks. They kind of work because of the Trickstar reason, but the main problem is spacing. Crossover Dress already has a problem with spacing, and of course one of the biggest weaknesses of this deck right now is Counterblast. This deck uses a lot of Counterblast and no way to countercharge until Mirror's Verena comes out in set 10. But overall, it has gone a little more fun and interesting at the same time that they're incorporating regular overdress, because now you can make more early game plays in a way, and also the theme of past and present being all in one deck, so it kind of can work. It's just weird, but it almost feels like they're trying to build up to something really big. Like, who knows, maybe we will have a new future Verena or something to represent the future. It could be even a new form of Nirvana Jheva that can represent the future, because we got past, present, and maybe the future. Who knows? But in that, I hope you guys enjoy this. Like I said, put whatever recommendations that you want and what other cards to suggest, because maybe I might miss something. But in that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.